So we have the final version of the Corona stimulus bill or bailout bill, whatever you want to call it. And it is very, very bad. So here's Zach Carter reporting on it. He says, final text of the bill has not been released. That's not true. Since he said that, it has been released. But according to a legislative draft, the new law would establish a $4.5 trillion corporate bailout fund overseen by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, with few substantive constraints. Some outlets are reporting it as a $500 billion fund, but $425 billion of that can be leveraged 10 times over by the Federal Reserve, resulting in a multi-trillion-dollar program. That's a very important fact that not many people are discussing, by the way. They are referring to it as a $500 billion bailout, not a $4.5 trillion one. The bill permits bailed out companies to lay off up to 10% of their workforce over the next 6 months with no restrictions thereafter. So after 6 months, you could fire as many people as you want, and that is going to lead to an absolute crisis. Mnuchin would have authority to waive any upside for the public in its new investments, and the bill's restrictions on stock buybacks at bailed out firms are too temporary to be significant. Bailed out companies could even pay dividends to their shareholders. Here we go again. Bailout money will flow to the shareholders of large corporations, otherwise known as rich people. The oversight terms the Democrats secured are purely cosmetic, replicating the toothless provisions of the 2008 bank bailout that enabled watchdogs to report abuse but not actually prevent it or rectify it. If you give vast amounts of public money to a single person with no real accountability, you won't like what happens next. Damon Silvers, the deputy chair of the oversight panel for the bank bailout, wrote on Tuesday. We're watching history repeat itself. This is very clearly not an FDR-like response. This is, okay, let's let the crooks who run Wall Street continue to run the government and basically bail out big financial institutions on their own terms. Everything that's supposed to be a regulatory, burden on them is toothless. So in the near future, expect a lot of sham hearings, for example, where they bring in the head of a corporation and they berate them and they say, "No, sir, I am wagging my finger at you." And then they go right back to doing the same kind of terrible practices that they were doing all along. So I have more for you. The latest version of the Senate bill offers its full cash benefits, $1,200 per adult tax filer, $500 per child, to even the poorest Americans, correcting a big problem with the first GOP draft of the bill that left out low-income people entirely. But you need to have filed taxes for 2018 or 2019 to get the benefit, which leaves out millions of Americans who do not typically need to file. Non-filers typically either rely on mostly non-taxable income like Social Security, retirement or disability benefits, or retirement income from a Roth account, or do not have enough money to owe taxes. Either way, they tend to be among the most economically vulnerable people in the country. So that alone excludes up to 30 million people. 30 million people. Giant loophole to screw regular people. But the final nail in the coffin, because I'm not done yet. If you don't already have direct deposit information on file with the IRS from previous tax returns, you won't get the emergency funds for up to 4 months, Democratic aides said. That includes vulnerable people who don't have bank accounts. Some of the most vulnerable people are left out of this. Other people who simply don't have direct deposit information on file with the IRS are left out of this for up to 4 months. So what you're talking about here is we'd be lucky if we even get the money to 50% of people who need the money. So you see the way this works? Whenever it's something for you, have 1,001 loopholes in there that make sure to put as many hurdles for you to jump through as humanly possible and make it difficult for regular people to get the funds that they need in this time of crisis. But the bailout for corporate America, oh my God. All the original strings that were attached, get rid of them on the low. I hope nobody's paying attention. Gone. It'll just be, little slaps on the wrist here and there and nothing but optics. Oh, we're going to say that we're looking after you very strongly and we're going to, wag our finger at you. But substantively, there's nothing preventing them from basically abusing the bailout. And to give discretion to Steve Mnuchin to determine a lot of the terms of the various bailouts, that's criminal. He's a Goldman Sachs guy. We know how corrupt he is. We know the terrible decisions that he's made. And you're going to leave it on this guy to determine, who gets to loot the treasury? And here we have it. These are the terms. Now, the provision that is good, that's good. Let me show you this tweet because this lays it out pretty well here. So a respectable lawyer pointed this out. He did it. Bernie just saved millions of people. And then you see an unemployment provision added to the Senate bill by Vermont Senator Bernard Sanders would see laid-off workers receive 100% of their salary up to $75,000 a year with tipped and gig economy workers covered. Bernie Sanders is a hero. I'm fucking crying. Thank you, Bernie. And then you see Jeffrey Stein. New Senator Bernie Sanders announces he will place hold over coronavirus bill and demand new restrictions to $500 billion fund for corporations unless 3 Republican senators drop their objections to unemployment insurance expansions. Bernie fucking flaming everyone on the Senate floor just now. And then breaking U.S. Senate passes $2 trillion coronavirus economic stimulus bill. 96-0 goes to House now. So in other words, what they're describing is that provision from Bernie, which is a wonderful provision. It expands unemployment insurance to cover 100% of your salary up to $75,000 a year. And it includes tipped workers and gig economy workers who would normally be left out and wouldn't, be able to get the unemployment. So Bernie did a strong expansion of unemployment insurance and came through on that front and did not back down, and it ended up in the final bill. That's a unbelievably positive thing, and we just learned today that the number of filings is about 3.3 million. So unemployment, people who need unemployment, absolutely skyrocketed. In fact, here, I could show you a chart on that one. That line is preposterous. That line shows that it just spikes straight up. So this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about, honestly, a crisis that's unprecedented since the Great Depression. I do think that this will surpass the Great Recession pretty easily. But overall, I have to say, guys, nobody should have voted for this bill. This bill was 96-0. You can't vote for this bill. You can't do it. You want to know why? Because it further puts in stone and ossifies our current system of rank corporatism. We live in a corporatocracy. That's what we live in. And we're watching it unfold right in front of our faces. As other countries, and we'll get to the details of it, but as other countries are saying, okay, we're going to pay $2,000 a month for the duration of the crisis to every person. As other countries are saying that, we're like, how can we wiggle out of giving people the help that they need? How can we make them jump through hoops? But at the same time, how can we set up a giant slush fund for all of corporate America? So understand, guys, this isn't even capitalism. Because under capitalism, if you go belly up as a company, you go belly up. That's the end of it. Go find a new line of work. Go try to open up a new business. You're done. You failed. You went bankrupt. It's over. But under this system, what they're doing is setting in stone the companies that are already on the top. So all of the companies, the government rushes in, bails them out with few strings attached or no strings attached, and then it's a moral hazard because they can never go bankrupt, they can never go belly up, so you're not incentivizing them to do proper business practices. They know, hey, when times are good, privatize the profits. When times are bad, socialize the losses. So if you're a CEO of one of these companies, if you're an owner of the companies, if you're one of the wealthy shareholders of the companies, you never lose. Under no circumstance do you ever lose. So your decisions are irrelevant. Your decisions don't matter. You don't have to pay your workers well. You don't have to have, an emergency fund for a rainy day. You don't have to stop doing stock buybacks, which artificially inflate the price of these companies. A lot of these companies got a giant tax cut in 2017. They did stock buybacks to the tune of tens of billions of dollars, and then they go run into the government hat in hand when the economy grinds to a halt because of the pandemic. Well, maybe you should have taken some of that money and put it in an emergency fund for a situation like this. Why do the taxpayers always have to rush in to bail out the corporations when they make bad decisions? By the way, we're going to bail them out, and then what? We bail them out, and then they're going to come back to the government in a year or two from now and say, I need another bailout. Why? Because even though you're bailing them out, the economy's still grinding to a halt. Nobody's going to, be out there in the world right now. Everybody's hunkered down because you need to so you don't die and so you don't get the virus. So the only response that would have made sense, in my opinion, was temporary nationalization. Because the people could be the owner of last resort, and then we could pass it back off to private hands when the time is right. Not only did we not do temporary nationalization, which some other countries are doing in certain industries, by the way. Not only did we not do that, the second best thing would have been, okay, you know what? We'll bail you out, but here are very, very strict rules that you cannot violate. Rules including executive compensation cannot be over a certain level. You cannot pay bonuses to any of your executives when the company is in dire financial straits as they are right now, like the companies did in 2008. That's out the window. No more stock buybacks. That's out the window. New rules on having to set up an emergency fund. Rules on not firing 100% of your workforce. You could have, if you were going to bail them out, you should have had super strict rules and regulations associated with it so that we make sure that these problems don't arise again in the future. They didn't do that. Elizabeth Warren released 8 terms for her to support a bailout, and then they adopted none of those terms, and she still supported the bill. This bill is going to age, I think, almost exactly like the original Wall Street bailout aged, and I think like the Patriot Act aged. In other words, at the time, oh my God, we have to do it, everybody rushed to do it. And then later on, everybody looks back at it and says, oh my God, what have you done? You've cemented corporate socialism, aka corporatism. You've cemented that as the dominant ideology and acting philosophy of our government. Now, I get it. You had to do something for the workers. But if I was Nancy Pelosi, if I was Chuck Schumer, if I was any and all the Democrats, honestly, what I would have done is I would have demanded, screaming from the top of my lungs, we need a clean vote on a bailout of the people. We'll get to the bailout of the financial institutions later. We'll work out the terms of that later. But right now, people need this support. People need the unemployment provision, which did end up getting into the final bill. People need, forget the one-time $1,200 payment. No, you need a UBI, at least for the duration of the crisis, at least 3 or 4 months. And then you could argue over the amount. But I would scream from the top of my lungs, we need a clean bailout of the people. I would have done my best to whip the votes to get every single Democrat on board for this, where we say, we're ready to act right now to fight this crisis, but it starts with the bailout of the people. So I don't want to see any provisions on any corporate bailouts mixed in the same bill. Let's first do a bailout of the people. Let's first expand the unemployment insurance and do a UBI for the duration of this crisis. Let's first and foremost do that because people can't pay the bills on April 1st. Let's get it out there and get it out there now. And I don't want to see any loopholes. I like the Rashida Tlaib and Bernie Sanders idea of prepaid debit cards to basically everybody in the country. And then you tax it back later. So if somebody, makes over a certain threshold, you could tax it back at the end of the year. But the benefit of doing it that way is you get all the stuff out ASAP. So I would have demanded we need to do a clean vote on a bailout of the people. And unfortunately, that was not the strategy from the Democrats. And, I think that a lot of them felt like this was absolutely necessary and we have no choice. And, they're holding the people hostage. So we gotta, but see, that's the thing. Politically, you should have pointed that out and you should have pinned it to them. Hey, all the Republicans are holding the people hostage. You're holding the people hostage. So we're going to point that out and we're going to clobber you over the head with it and we're going to shame you for it and we're going to embarrass you for it. And everybody's going to know about that. And you weaponize that politically to say, hey, it's not us, man. We're ready to pass this bailout of the people right now. And the Republicans are blocking it. But no, they held the people hostage and said, you're going to do basically a multi-trillion-dollar bailout of corporations that have terrible terms associated with it. And so everybody ended up falling in line. If I was in the Senate, I would have voted no on it. I would have. Because the lack of rules associated with the bailout, the terms of it, so much discretion to the Treasury Secretary, you literally just gave Donald Trump and his merry band of corporate goons and thugs, you gave them basically unlimited powers to give money to whichever corporate friends they want to. I got a bridge to sell you if you really think it's going to go to the companies it needs to go to and it's going to help the people it needs to help. No. This was a corporate heist. This was a scam. This was a sham. And we're all going to be worse off as a result of it. No matter what happens, the 1% doesn't lose. And there's another example of it right here.